April 1945, Northern Italy. The war in Europe was collapsing like a house of cards. German forces retreated northward toward the Alps, leaving behind scattered pockets of resistance that dissolved almost as quickly as they formed. Most surrendered without a fight, some melted into civilian populations, and a few held their positions out of stubborn discipline or simple confusion about what else to do. One such forgotten position was Communications Station 7, located 15 kilometers outside Bologna. Built into a hillside and reinforced with steel and camouflage netting, this concrete bunker had once coordinated radio traffic for German forces across the entire region. But now, those forces were gone. The communications network had collapsed, and the station's personnel were stranded. 7 people remained at the station, 5 male radio operators, 1 female cipher specialist, and 1 female auxiliary who'd been sent from headquarters 3 months earlier to help process increased message volume. For days, the men had debated what to do. The women had no voice in these discussions, but they understood the conclusion was inevitable. On April 12th, the commanding sergeant gathered everyone in the main bunker room. His name was Klaus Weber, 41 years old, from Bavaria, exhausted beyond measure. "We have food for 3 more days," he announced. "No ammunition, no orders. The radio has been silent for a week. The Americans are 10 kilometers south and advancing. We need to decide." "Surrender," said Franz Lehmann, the youngest operator, just 22. "What else is there?" "They'll send us to prison camps," another operator replied. "In America, we'll be gone for years. Better than starving here," Franz countered. They argued for hours while the 2 women, Ilse Brandt, the cipher specialist, and Katharina Becker, the auxiliary, sat against the wall and listened. They had no vote in this discussion. Their presence was barely acknowledged in these male debates about fate and honor and practical necessity. Finally, Weber decided, "We destroy what equipment we can. We surrender at dawn. If the Americans are merciful, we live. If not..." He didn't finish the sentence, but dawn on April 13th brought no Americans. Neither did April 14th. The station sat in its hillside bunker, waiting, while food dwindled and desperation grew. By April 15th, they were eating the last of their rations, hard biscuits that tasted like cardboard, tinned meat from 1942 that barely qualified as food. The water supply was adequate, but the lack of food was becoming critical. Katharina Becker felt herself weakening. She was 26 years old, from a small town near Stuttgart, educated enough to work communications but not essential enough to be evacuated when things collapsed. She'd lost 15 kilograms in the past 3 months. Her uniform hung on her like a tent. Her periods had stopped. Her hair had started falling out. She wasn't dying yet, but she was approaching the threshold where not dying required more resources than were available. "We should just walk out," she said to Ilse that afternoon. "Find the Americans, surrender properly." "Weber won't allow it," Ilse replied. "He's afraid they'll think we're trying to escape, that they'll respond with force. So we wait here until we starve?" Ilse had no answer. Corporal James Mitchell was 24 years old, from Ohio, a member of the 88th Infantry Division that had pushed through Italy since Anzio. He'd seen combat, lost friends, and developed the tired competence of someone who'd survived longer than probability suggested he should. On April 15th, his squad was on patrol, clearing abandoned German positions, looking for stragglers, ensuring no pockets of resistance remained to threaten supply lines. It was boring work, mostly walking through countryside that showed scars of recent fighting, checking buildings that were already empty. Around 3 in the afternoon, they approached the hillside where intelligence suggested a communication station might be located. The aerial photographs were old, the information unreliable, but orders said, "Check everything." "Probably empty," said Private Danny Cohen, walking beside Mitchell. "Everything else has been..." "Yeah, probably," Mitchell agreed. They found the bunker entrance camouflaged with netting and branches. The steel door was closed but not locked. Mitchell pushed it open slowly, rifle ready, expecting nothing. Instead, he heard voices, German voices speaking in intense, frightened tones. He signaled his squad to take positions, then called out in the German he'd learned from a phrase book. "American soldiers, come out, hands visible. We will not harm you." Silence, then movement. The door opened wider, and a German sergeant emerged, hands raised, face resigned. "We surrender," the sergeant said in accented English. 7 personnel, no weapons, no resistance." 5 men filed out, hands raised, looking exhausted and frightened. Then 2 women, both in auxiliary uniforms that hung loose on thin frames. The second woman, younger, blonde, barely able to walk, stumbled as she exited the bunker. She tried to catch herself, failed, and collapsed onto the gravel outside the entrance. Mitchell moved without thinking. He handed his rifle to Cohen, knelt beside her, and checked for injuries. She was conscious, but barely responsive. Her skin was cold despite the afternoon warmth. Her pulse was weak and rapid. Her eyes had the glassy quality of advanced malnutrition. "Jesus Christ," Cohen muttered. "She's starving." Mitchell opened his canteen, lifted her head carefully, and brought water to her lips. "Drink slowly, small sips." She drank desperately, choking, coughing. He pulled the canteen back. "Easy now," he said, switching to his broken German. "You're mine now, under my protection. Nobody's going to hurt you." The words came automatically, meant as reassurance, a declaration that she was under American custody and therefore safe from harm. But the other Germans tensed, misunderstanding the phrasing, thinking Mitchell was claiming her as personal property in some darker sense. Sergeant Weber stepped forward, but Cohen interrupted in better German than Mitchell possessed. "Sir, please. He means she's under US military protection, standard prisoner procedure, not anything else." Weber relaxed slightly. Mitchell didn't notice the confusion. His attention was on the woman whose pulse felt like bird wings against his fingers, whose body felt like it might break if he wasn't careful. "What's her name?" he asked Weber. "Becker. Katharina Becker. Auxiliary communications. She's been here 3 months. Food has been, limited." "Limited?" Mitchell repeated, looking at her skeletal frame. "That's one word for it." He lifted her carefully, she weighed almost nothing, and carried her to the jeep parked 50 meters down the road. The other prisoners were marched along under guard. Mitchell laid Katharina on the back seat, covered her with his jacket, and drove toward the battalion aid station, with Cohen riding shotgun. "You gonna get in trouble for this?" Cohen asked. "For what? Taking a sick prisoner to medical attention? That's protocol. For the way you're treating her, like she's wounded, not captured." Mitchell glanced in the rearview mirror. Katharina's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. "She is wounded. Starvation's a wound. She needs treatment same as anyone else." "She's German," Cohen pointed out. "She's a human being who needs medical attention," Mitchell replied. "War's almost over anyway. What's the point of letting people die from neglect now?" The battalion aid station was set up in a commandeered farmhouse, staffed by 2 doctors and 4 medics who'd been treating combat casualties for months and were exhausted by it. When Mitchell carried Katharina through the door, the duty medic, a sergeant named Paul Rivera, barely glanced up. "Wounded? Starving prisoner. Needs immediate attention." Rivera looked more carefully, saw Katharina's condition, and his expression shifted from boredom to concern. "Christ, put her on that cot." Mitchell laid her down gently. Rivera began his examination, checking vitals, looking for injuries, assessing the extent of malnutrition. "How long has she been like this?" he asked. "Don't know. Found her at an abandoned communications station. They'd been cut off for weeks, maybe months." Rivera shook his head. "She's probably 40 kilos, maybe less. Severe protein deficiency, dehydration, despite you giving her water, probably anemia, definitely suffering from extended caloric restriction." He looked at Mitchell. "She needs food, real food, but we have to start slow or we'll cause more damage." "What do you need me to do?" Mitchell asked. "Nothing. Go back to your unit. We'll handle her." Mitchell hesitated. Something in him resisted leaving. He'd found her. He'd told her she was under his protection. That meant something, even if he couldn't articulate what. "I'll stay," he said. "Make sure she's all right." Rivera raised an eyebrow. "You got a thing for German prisoners, Corporal?" "I got a thing for finishing what I start," Mitchell replied. "I told her she'd be safe. I want to make sure that's true. Fine. Sit in that corner. Don't interfere. Mitchell sat and watched as Rivera started an IV, administered fluids, and checked Katharina's condition repeatedly. After 30 minutes, the station doctor, Captain Friedman, came over to examine her. How'd she get this bad? Friedman asked. Cut off from supply lines, Rivera explained. Probably been on minimum rations for months. Friedman checked her pupils, her tongue, her extremities. She's on the edge. Could go either way. We need to feed her carefully. Broth, small amounts, frequent intervals. Too much too fast will overwhelm her system. He looked at Mitchell. You brought her in? Yes, sir. Good work. Most guys would have just marched her to the prisoner collection point and let her collapse there. You probably saved her life. Just doing what seemed right, sir. Friedman studied him. You planning to stay here all day? If that's allowed, sir. Want to make sure she pulls through. She's not your responsibility anymore. She's a prisoner. We'll take care of her. I know, sir, but I'd feel better staying, if that's permitted. Friedman exchanged a glance with Rivera, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, fine, but you stay out of the way, and if your commanding officer asks where you are, I'll tell him you're assisting with prisoner processing. Got it? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Hours passed. The aid station treated other patients. Minor injuries, infections, exhaustion cases. Mitchell sat in his corner watching Katharina sleep fitfully on the cot, occasionally stirring but never waking fully. Around 6 in the evening, Rivera brought broth, thin chicken stock with tiny pieces of vegetable. He woke Katharina gently, speaking in rudimentary German. You must eat. Small amounts. Slowly. She woke confused, frightened, trying to sit up and failing. Rivera supported her, brought the bowl to her lips. She drank eagerly. Too eagerly. Slow, Rivera insisted, pulling the bowl back. Too fast and you'll vomit. Small sips. Wait between them. Mitchell stood, moved closer without thinking. Let me, he said. Rivera looked skeptical, but handed him the bowl. Mitchell knelt beside the cot, held the broth carefully. Katharina, he said, using her first name without considering whether it was appropriate. You need to drink this slowly. I know you're hungry, but if you drink too fast, it'll make you sick, understand? She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were grey, sunken into hollow sockets, but intelligent, aware. You are the soldier? She said in heavily accented English. From the bunker. Yes, I brought you here to get help. Why? The question was direct, genuine. Why help enemy? Mitchell thought about his answer. Because you needed help. Because the war's almost over and letting people die from neglect now would be wrong. Because you're a person. I am prisoner. You're both, Mitchell said. Right now you're a prisoner who needs food. Here, small sips. He held the bowl while she drank, pulling it back when she tried to drink too fast, waiting while she caught her breath, then offering it again. The process took 30 minutes. She finished maybe half the bowl before exhaustion claimed her, and she slept again. Rivera watched from across the room. When Mitchell stood, setting the bowl aside, Rivera approached. You got a gentle touch, Mitchell. Good with patience. Just seemed like she needed someone patient. Most guys wouldn't bother. Most guys would figure she's the enemy. She deserves whatever she gets. Most guys are wrong, Mitchell replied simply. Evening turned to night. The aid station quieted. Most patients were stable. The doctors and medics rotated shifts, catching sleep when possible. Mitchell stayed. He told himself it was to ensure Katharina received proper care. He told himself it was duty, responsibility, completing the commitment he'd made when he told her she was under his protection. But sitting in the dark aid station, watching her sleep restlessly on the cot, he acknowledged something more complicated. She reminded him of his sister. Similar age, similar build before the starvation, similar intelligence in her eyes. He couldn't articulate it clearly, but helping her felt necessary in ways that transcended military obligation. Around midnight, she woke crying out in German. A nightmare. Mitchell moved to her side, spoke quietly. You're safe. You're in an American aid station. No one will hurt you. She looked at him, disoriented. Where am I? Medical facility. You collapsed. We're treating you. The others, Sergeant Weber, Franz? They're fine. Being processed as prisoners, they'll be sent to a collection point, then probably to a camp in the US. You too, once you're strong enough to travel. She absorbed this. America. We will go to America? Probably. It's a long way from the fighting. Safe. You'll be treated fairly. The propaganda said Americans treat prisoners badly. That you, she struggled for words, that you have no mercy. Propaganda lied about a lot of things, Mitchell said. We treat prisoners according to the Geneva Convention, food, shelter, medical care, fair work assignments, no mistreatment. You are kind, she said quietly. When you found me, when you said, you're mine now, the others thought you meant something bad. But I understood. You meant protection. Mitchell felt embarrassed. Yeah, sorry if the phrasing was confusing. I meant you were under US military custody, safe from harm. Thank you, Katharina said, for the food, for the care, for seeing me as a person, not just enemy. You're welcome, Mitchell replied. Then, because it felt necessary, what's it like? Being in the German forces, being part of... He didn't know how to finish. Being part of losing, she supplied. Being part of machine that did terrible things. She was quiet for a moment. I joined because I needed work, because the auxiliary paid better than factory work, because I was young and stupid and believed what I was told. Now, she gestured at her skeletal frame, now I am prisoner, starving prisoner, soon to be sent far from home. This is what comes from serving bad leaders. You couldn't have known? I could have asked questions, Katharina interrupted, could have looked at what was happening and thought about it. Instead, I kept my head down and did my job and told myself it wasn't my responsibility. That's what we all did, and look where it brought us. Mitchell had no response. They sat in silence while darkness pressed against the windows and the aid station breathed around them, sleeping patients, tired medics, the quiet machinery of war winding down. Sleep, he said finally. You need rest. Tomorrow you'll have more food. Day after, even more. You'll get stronger. And then? She asked. And then you'll be processed, sent to America, start recovering properly. Eventually go home when the war officially ends and repatriation begins. Home, she repeated. The word sounded hollow. I don't know if I have home anymore. Stuttgart was bombed. My family. I don't know if they survived. Letters stopped coming months ago. You'll find out, Mitchell said with more certainty than he felt. When you get to the camp, they'll help you locate family through the Red Cross. It takes time, but they'll help. She closed her eyes. You are very kind. For enemy soldier. You're very gracious. For defeated auxiliary. Mitchell replied. He almost smiled. Then sleep took her again, and Mitchell resumed his watch, keeping vigil through the night for reasons he couldn't fully explain to himself. Morning brought Captain Friedman making rounds. He checked Katharina's vitals, examined her condition, nodded with satisfaction. She's stabilizing. Pulse is stronger, color's better. Keep feeding her small amounts every 2 hours. Broth today, maybe some bread tomorrow if she tolerates it. He looked at Mitchell, who was asleep in a chair beside the cot. He stay all night? Yes, sir, Rivera confirmed. Wouldn't leave. That's unusual. Most soldiers want to get back to their units as soon as possible. Mitchell's unusual, sir. Good guy. Really cares about people. Friedman grunted. Well, he can't stay forever. His CO is probably wondering where he is. But Mitchell did stay. He sent Cohen back to the unit with a message that he was assisting medical personnel with prisoner process. Technically true, though not the whole truth. His sergeant grumbled but allowed it. Figuring one corporal more or less didn't matter much with the war winding down. Throughout the day, Mitchell helped care for Katharina. He fed her broth every 2 hours. He helped her to the latrine when she was strong enough to walk, averting his eyes, giving her privacy, supporting her weight when she stumbled. He sat with her during the long hours between meals, talking in his broken German and her improving English about nothing important and everything important simultaneously. They talked about their lives before the war. He'd been a machinist in Cleveland, working in a factory that made car parts. She'd been a secretary in Stuttgart, working for an insurance company. Normal people with normal lives before circumstance and ideology had thrown them into uniforms. What will you do? She asked. When war ends? Go home. Go back to the factory. Probably get married. I've got a girl back in Ohio, been writing to her. Try to forget as much of this as I can. And me? Katharina asked. What will I do? Whatever you want. Rebuild. Find your family if they survived. Get work. Live your life. If anyone hires women who served in German military, they will, Mitchell said, with more confidence than he felt. Germany will need workers. Everyone who survived will need to rebuild. Your service won't matter as much as your willingness to work. You believe this? I have to believe this, Mitchell replied. Otherwise, what's the point? Otherwise, we fought a war just to create a permanent underclass of defeated people. That's not what America wants. We want Germany rebuilt, stable, peaceful. Can't do that if we punish everyone who served. Katharina studied his face. You are optimist. I'm practical. Vengeance doesn't work. Mercy works better. History shows this. Does it? She sounded skeptical. Does history show mercy? Sometimes, Mitchell said, when people choose it. On the third day, new orders came. All prisoners in the sector were to be consolidated at a central collection point near Florence, then transported to port facilities for eventual shipment to camps in the United States. Processing needed to happen quickly. The war was ending, demobilization was starting, efficiency was required. Captain Friedman pulled Mitchell aside. Your prisoner is stable enough to travel. She needs continued feeding, but she can handle transport if it's done carefully. She'll go to the collection point tomorrow. Will she be all right? Mitchell asked. Will they keep feeding her properly? That's not your concern anymore, Corporal. She's no longer your responsibility. But you did good work. You saved her life, probably. But she's a prisoner, and you're a soldier, and you have duties elsewhere. Report back to your unit. Mitchell felt resistance rising. Sir, I want to escort her, make sure she arrives safely, make sure whoever takes custody understands her medical condition. Friedman studied him. Why does this particular prisoner matter so much to you? Mitchell struggled to articulate it. Because I told her she'd be safe, because I found her, and I feel responsible, because... He stopped, unable to finish. Because she reminds you of someone, Friedman supplied. Sister? Girlfriend? Someone back home you're trying to save by proxy? Maybe, Mitchell admitted. I don't know. I just know I can't leave her now. Not until I'm sure she's going to be okay, Friedman sighed. All right, you can escort her to the collection point, but that's it. Once she's there, you turn around and come back. No extended attachment. No continuing responsibility. Understood? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The next morning, Mitchell drove Katharina to the collection point in a jeep. She sat beside him, wrapped in a blanket, clutching a small bag containing her few possessions. Some letters, a photograph of her family, her auxiliary identification papers. They drove through Italian countryside showing signs of war and recovery, both bombed buildings being repaired, fields being replanted, people returning to villages, the machinery of normal life trying to restart. It's beautiful, Katharina said, looking at hills covered with olive trees. I forgot things could be beautiful. You've been in a bunker for months, Mitchell replied. Everything looks beautiful after that. They drove in comfortable silence. Finally, Katharina spoke. When you said, "You're mine now," did you mean it? Mitchell glanced at her. Mean what? That you would protect me? That you would take responsibility? Yes, I meant it. You kept your promise, she said quietly. You protected me, fed me, stayed with me, made sure I received care. You kept your word. That's what decent people do, Mitchell replied. They keep their word. Not all people keep their word, not in war. I have seen... She stopped, couldn't continue. Mitchell didn't press. They drove on through afternoon light that turned everything gold and soft. When they reached the collection point, a former Italian military barracks now filled with hundreds of German prisoners awaiting processing, Mitchell helped Katharina from the jeep. She could walk now without support, though she was still weak, still skeletal, still months from full recovery. He escorted her to the processing desk, explained her medical condition to the sergeant in charge, handed over her papers. The sergeant barely listened, already overwhelmed by the volume of prisoners arriving daily. She'll be fed 3 times a day, the sergeant said dismissively. Medical personnel check everyone. She'll be fine. She needs continued careful feeding, Mitchell insisted. Too much too fast will damage her. I said we'll take care of it, Corporal. You're dismissed. Mitchell looked at Katharina. She looked back at him, something unspoken passing between them. Thank you, she said in English, for everything, for seeing me as human, for keeping promise, for, she struggled for words, or for being good man in bad war. You're welcome, Mitchell replied. Good luck, Katharina. Find your family, rebuild, be happy. And you, she said, go home to your girl. Be happy also. Forget war if you can. He wanted to say more, wanted to ensure she'd be all right, that the system would care for her as he had, that promises would be kept by people who hadn't made them, but he'd done all he could. The rest was beyond his control. He turned and walked back to the jeep, drove away without looking back, though he wanted to. Behind him, Katharina stood in a crowd of prisoners, watching until the jeep disappeared, carrying with her the memory of an enemy soldier who'd shown mercy when mercy wasn't required. Katharina spent 3 weeks at the collection point before transport to America. The feeding was less careful than what Mitchell had provided, but adequate. She gained weight slowly, her body remembering how to process food properly. In June, she boarded a ship at Naples, along with 800 other prisoners. The voyage took 2 weeks. They landed at Norfolk, Virginia, were processed through facilities that felt impersonal but efficient, then transported by train to Camp Ruston, Louisiana. The camp was vast, hundreds of barracks, thousands of prisoners, a small city of the defeated, waiting for war's end and eventual repatriation. Conditions were decent, food was adequate, work was available, but the boredom was crushing, the uncertainty worse. Katharina worked in the camp administrative office, filing documents. Her education and language skills made her valuable. The work was mind-numbing, but better than physical labor she wasn't yet strong enough to handle. She thought often about Mitchell, about his patience, his kindness, his insistence on treating her as human rather than thing. She thought about his words, that she was under his protection, that mercy worked better than vengeance, that she could rebuild and find happiness. In August, Germany surrendered. The war officially ended. Prisoners listened to radio broadcasts with mixed relief and dread. Relief that fighting had stopped. Dread about what came next. Katharina received news through the Red Cross in September. Her family had survived. Her parents were alive, living with relatives outside Stuttgart. Her brother had died in Russia. Her sister had married an American soldier and was immigrating to the United States. The news was bittersweet, relief that her parents survived, grief for her brother, confusion about her sister's choice. Everything was changing. The world she'd known was gone, replaced by something uncertain and new. In October 1945, Katharina did something unusual. She wrote a letter to Corporal James Mitchell, care of the 88th Infantry Division, forwarded through military postal services. She didn't know if it would reach him, didn't know if he'd remember her, but she needed to tell him something. Dear Corporal Mitchell, I hope this letter finds you well and that you've returned home to your family and your girl in Ohio. I am writing from Camp Ruston in Louisiana, where I have been since June. I am healthy now. I have gained back much of the weight I lost. I work in the camp office. I wanted to thank you for what you did in April when you found me. You saved my life. This is clear, but more than that, you gave me something I had lost, the belief that people can be decent, even to enemies, that mercy is possible even in war, that humanity survives when we choose to preserve it. When you said, "You're mine now," I understood you meant protection. You kept that promise. You fed me, cared for me, ensured I received proper treatment. You did not have to do these things. Many soldiers would not have bothered, but you did. And I will remember this always. I don't know what will happen to me. Eventually, I will return to Germany and try to rebuild my life. I don't know if I will succeed. Germany is destroyed, and I am a woman who served the regime that destroyed it. But I will try, because you showed me that even defeated people deserve dignity and care. Thank you for being good man in terrible time. Thank you for choosing mercy when cruelty would have been easier. Thank you for keeping your promise. I will try to be worthy of the kindness you showed me. Your grateful prisoner, Katharina Becker. The letter was forwarded through multiple military postal offices, delayed by bureaucracy and the chaos of demobilization. It finally reached Mitchell in January 1946, 3 months after she'd written it. He was home in Cleveland by then, working at the factory, engaged to his girl, trying to resume normal life. The letter arrived at his parents' house, forwarded from his military address. He read it 3 times. Then he sat at the kitchen table and wrote a response. Dear Katharina, I was glad to receive your letter and to learn that you are healthy and recovering well. I often wondered what happened to you after I left you at the collection point. I'm relieved to know you are being treated fairly. You thanked me for showing mercy, but I don't think I did anything special. I just treated you like a human being who needed help. That should be normal, not exceptional. The fact that it seems exceptional says something sad about war. I hope you find your family when you return to Germany. I hope you rebuild your life successfully. I hope you find happiness and peace. You deserve both. I'm back in Cleveland now, working at the factory, planning to marry my girl in the spring. I try not to think too much about the war, but some things stay with you. Meeting you was one of those things. Not because you were German or prisoner or enemy, but because you reminded me that even in war, people remain people. That lesson is worth keeping. Good luck with everything. Build a good life. Be happy. You've earned it. Your friend, is that allowed? I hope so. James Mitchell. They corresponded sporadically for the next 2 years. Brief letters, months apart, sharing updates about their lives. Mitchell married his girl in June 1946. Katharina was repatriated to Germany in August 1946, found her parents living in difficult conditions but surviving. The letters became less frequent as their lives diverged. Mitchell had a daughter in 1947, a son in 1949. Katharina found work as a translator, married a schoolteacher in 1950. Their worlds moved apart as they'd always been going to. The last letter came in 1952, Katharina writing to tell Mitchell she was pregnant, that she'd named her husband after him, not James, but with the same meaning, Jakob, one who protects. Because you taught me, she wrote, that protection matters, that promises matter, that even enemies can choose to be decent to each other. I want my son to learn this. I want him to know that even in the worst times there are people who choose kindness. Thank you for being that person for me. Mitchell never responded to that last letter, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't find words adequate to what he felt. Instead, he kept it in a drawer of his desk, read it occasionally when the world felt too harsh or cynical, reminded himself that small acts of mercy could echo forward through generations. In 1985, 40 years after the war, Mitchell received an unexpected visitor. A young German man, maybe 35, knocked on his door in Cleveland and introduced himself as Jakob Richter, Katharina's son. My mother told me about you, Jakob said in excellent English, about how you saved her life, about the promise you made and kept. She died last year. Before she passed, she asked me to find you if I could, to thank you on her behalf one final time. Mitchell invited him in. They sat in his living room. Mitchell, now 64, retired, his wife making coffee in the kitchen, and talked about Katharina. She spoke of you often, Jakob said. Not obsessively, but warmly. She said you showed her that Americans were more than propaganda claimed, that enemies could be merciful, that humanity survived war if people chose to preserve it. I just gave her food and medical attention, Mitchell said. Anyone would have done the same? No, Jakob replied firmly. Most wouldn't have. I've studied the war. I know how prisoners were sometimes treated on both sides. You chose to treat my mother with dignity when you could have simply processed her and moved on. That choice saved her life. It also saved something in her spirit. She never spoke bitterly about the war because she'd experienced mercy in defeat. Mitchell thought about that. What did she do after the war? She worked as a translator. She helped rebuild. She married my father, a good man, a teacher. She raised me and my two sisters. She told us about the war honestly, about the regime's crimes, about her complicity through service, about the cost of not questioning authority. But she also told us about you, about mercy, about the possibility of decency, even in terrible circumstances. I'm glad she had a good life, Mitchell said. I hoped she would. Always wondered. Jakob pulled an envelope from his jacket. She wanted you to have this. She wrote it before she died. Asked me to deliver it if I could find you. Mitchell opened the letter with trembling hands. Inside, Katharina's handwriting, shaky with age but still clear. Dear James, if you are reading this, then I have died, and my son has found you. I am glad. I wanted you to know what became of the starving girl you saved in Italy. I lived a good life. I married a good man. I raised good children who know about the war and its lessons. I worked to rebuild Germany into something better than what we destroyed. I tried to be worthy of the mercy you showed me. I never forgot what you said. You're mine now. Those words meant protection. They meant responsibility. They meant seeing me as human rather than enemy. Every time I doubted whether humanity could survive war, I remembered those words. They were my foundation. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for treating me with dignity. Thank you for showing me that even in war's worst moments, people can choose kindness. I built my life on that lesson. I hope I built well. Your grateful prisoner, always, Katharina Mitchell, wept. Not loudly but steadily, tears carving lines down his aged face, while his wife put a hand on his shoulder and Jakob sat quietly, giving him space for grief. She built very well, Mitchell said finally. If she raised you, if she taught you these lessons, if she turned her experience into wisdom, she built very well indeed. James Mitchell died in 1998 at age 77. Among his possessions, his children found a wooden box containing letters from Katharina Becker, photographs from Italy, and a small notebook where he'd recorded memories of the war. One entry, dated 1975, read, I've been thinking about Katharina lately, about finding her in that bunker, about carrying her to the aid station, about telling her she was under my protection. I didn't think much of it at the time, just seemed like the right thing to do. But now, 30 years later, I realize that moment defined everything I believe about how people should treat each other. She was enemy, I was victor. I could have let her die or treated her with indifference. Instead, I chose mercy, not because I was heroic, but because she was human, and humans deserve care. That simple choice, treat people decently even when you don't have to, is the only thing from the war I'm proud of. Everything else, the fighting, the destruction, the loss, was necessity or tragedy or both. But choosing mercy was a choice. Choosing to see her as a person was a choice. Those choices mattered more than any battle. I hope she remembers that. I hope it made her life better. I hope she passed it forward to her children and they passed it to theirs. That's how wars end. Not with treaties, but with individuals choosing to be decent even toward defeated enemies. That's the only victory that matters. In 2019, a historian researching American treatment of German POWs discovered correspondence between James Mitchell and Katharina Becker. The letters were preserved in military archives, forwarded there by Mitchell's children after his death. The historian published excerpts in an academic journal, arguing that individual acts of mercy during war had long-term consequences that formal policies couldn't achieve, that treating enemies with dignity planted seeds of reconciliation that grew into post-war cooperation. The article attracted little attention. Most people weren't interested in small stories about individual kindness when grand narratives of strategy and victory were available. But Jakob Richter, now 74 and living in Munich, read the article. He contacted the historian, shared his mother's letters, provided additional context. Together they organized a small commemoration in Cleveland, unveiling a memorial plaque at the factory where Mitchell had worked. The plaque read, "In memory of James Mitchell, 1921-1998, who showed that mercy and duty can coexist, that enemies can be treated with dignity, and that the best victories come not from defeating opponents, but from recognizing their humanity. May we all learn to say "you're mine now" as a promise of protection rather than a threat of domination. The ceremony was attended by Mitchell's grandchildren, Katharina's grandchildren, military historians, and a few veterans who remembered similar moments of choosing mercy when cruelty would have been easier. One speaker, a former POW himself captured in Vietnam, said, "Wars are won by armies, but peace is built by individuals who choose compassion." Mitchell chose compassion. That choice echoed through decades, shaped families, taught lessons that no military manual could provide. His victory wasn't over an enemy, it was over the impulse to dehumanize. That's the only victory that lasts. The story of James Mitchell and Katharina Becker is small in the grand scope of World War II. No major battle turned on his decision to carry a starving prisoner to medical care. No strategic objective was accomplished by his choice to stay with her and ensure her recovery. But for Katharina, lying in that bunker, barely conscious, hearing "you're mine now," those words meant everything. They meant survival. They meant dignity. They meant proof that even in humanity's darkest hours, mercy could surface unexpectedly. For Mitchell, the decision was simple. A person needed help. He provided it. Nothing heroic, just decent. But decent was heroic. Decent was choosing to see humanity in the enemy. Decent was keeping promises when no one would have blamed him for breaking them. Decent was recognizing that mine could mean protection rather than possession, responsibility rather than domination. That recognition, that small moment of choosing mercy over indifference, created ripples that spread across decades. Katharina lived because Mitchell chose decency. Her children existed because she survived. Her grandchildren learned about mercy because she taught them. The lesson propagated forward, person to person, generation to generation. This is how wars truly end, not with treaties or tribunals or formal ceremonies, but with individuals deciding that enemies are still people, that victory doesn't require cruelty, that the best way to win is to preserve humanity even in those we've defeated. Think about it. In April 1945, a 24-year-old American corporal could have walked past that bunker, could have accepted the surrender of 7 German soldiers and moved on, could have let the skeletal woman collapse and assigned her to someone else's care. No one would have blamed him. She was the enemy. Her country had started the war. Her forces had committed atrocities. By every measure of wartime logic, she deserved nothing from him. But Mitchell didn't see an enemy. He saw a human being, a 26-year-old woman who'd made poor choices, yes, but who was also starving, frightened, and facing death. He saw someone who needed help, and in that moment he made a choice that would echo for 75 years and counting. The phrase "you're mine now" carries weight. In war, it can sound like a threat, a claim of ownership, a promise of domination. The other German soldiers heard it that way at first, tensing at what they thought Mitchell meant. But Katharina understood. Even in her weakened state, even through the fog of malnutrition and fear, she grasped what he was really saying. "I am taking responsibility for you. I am claiming you not as property but as duty. I am making you my obligation. Under my watch, you will be safe." It's the difference between mine as possession and mine as protection. The difference between owning and owing, between taking and giving. Mitchell could have phrased it differently. He could have said, "You're a prisoner now," or "You're under arrest," or "You're coming with us." All technically accurate, but "you're mine now" carried a personal commitment. It meant he wasn't just following procedure. He was making a promise to this specific person in this specific moment. And then, and this is the crucial part, he kept that promise. He didn't just hand her off to the medics and walk away. He stayed. He fed her. He sat with her through the night. He advocated for her care. He escorted her to the collection point. He made sure the promise he'd made in a moment of compassion was honored through days of follow-through. Anyone can make promises, keeping them, especially when it's inconvenient, especially when no one is watching, especially when the person you promised is supposed to be your enemy. That's what separates words from character. Let's trace the ripples. Mitchell saves Katharina. She survives the war. She returns to Germany. She marries and has children. She teaches them about mercy and humanity. They grow up with those values. They pass them to their children. 75 years later, her grandson travels to America to thank the man who saved his mother and taught his family that even enemies can be decent. But it goes further. Mitchell's act influences the medics who watch him care for her. They treat other prisoners with more compassion. Those prisoners survive and return home with stories of American mercy. Their communities learn that enemies can be humane. Post-war reconciliation becomes slightly easier. Germany and America build a lasting alliance. One person's choice to be decent doesn't change history's grand trajectory, but 1,000 such choices, 1,000,000 such choices, they change everything. Consider what would have happened if Mitchell had made the easier choice, if he'd accepted the surrender, marched them all to the collection point, and moved on. Katharina probably dies. Even if she survives, she returns to Germany believing the propaganda that Americans are cruel, that enemies show no mercy, that might makes right. She raises children with those beliefs. They pass them to their children. The cycle of hatred continues, person by person, generation by generation. Instead, because one corporal chose compassion, an entire family line carries a different lesson, and they're not alone. Mitchell wasn't unique. Thousands of soldiers on all sides made similar choices, small acts of mercy that accumulated into something larger. Those accumulated acts, far more than any treaty or reparation payment, built the post-war peace. Here's what makes this story uncomfortable. It challenges us to see our enemies as human, not to excuse what they've done, not to pretend there aren't real differences or real harms, but to recognize that even people on the wrong side of history are still people, that even those who've made terrible choices still deserve basic dignity, that our victory over them doesn't require their dehumanization. That's hard. It's emotionally hard. It's psychologically hard. It's politically hard. It's much easier to see enemies as monsters, to believe they deserve whatever happens to them, to justify cruelty with the argument that they'd do the same to us. Mitchell could have made all those arguments. Katharina's country had bombed Allied cities, killed Allied soldiers, committed genocidal atrocities. By any measure, Germany was on the wrong side of that war. But Mitchell didn't see Germany when he found Katharina. He saw a starving woman who needed help. He didn't think about national guilt or collective responsibility or who started the war. He thought about an immediate human need and his ability to meet it. That's the challenge. Can we see people even when we can't condone what they've done? Can we provide care even to those who wouldn't have provided it to us? Can we be better than our worst enemies without becoming worse versions of ourselves? James Mitchell said, "You're mine now," to a starving German prisoner. He meant protection. He delivered on that promise, and in doing so, he taught a lesson more valuable than any military victory. We are all finally responsible for each other. That mercy is not weakness but strength, that even in war, especially in war, we can choose to be decent, and that choice echoes forward forever. Proof that humanity survives when we choose to preserve it, one person at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one promise kept at a time, especially when no one would blame us for breaking it. Katharina Becker died in 1984, believing that people could be decent even to enemies. She built a good life on that belief. She raised children who carried that lesson forward. She never forgot the American soldier who showed her mercy when mercy wasn't required. James Mitchell died in 1998, proud of only one thing from the war, that he chose compassion when indifference would have been easier, that he saw a human being who needed help and helped her. Simple, decent, heroic. The war ended in 1945, but the victory, the real victory, continues. Every time someone chooses mercy over cruelty, every time someone sees humanity in an enemy, every time someone says "you're mine now" and means protection, not possession, that victory echoes forward through generations, through families, through cultures, through time. One promise kept, one life saved, one lesson learned, and the world, slowly, becomes a little bit more human. That's the story of Corporal James Mitchell and Katharina Becker, a small story from a big war, a moment of mercy that mattered more than battles, a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, we can choose the light. And that choice, that simple, difficult, necessary choice, makes all the difference.